There, an honest-to-God mechanical bull swung back and forth, dipping and bucking as a laughing woman with big hair and tiny shorts held on for dear life. The ring was surrounded on all sides by beer-drinking spectators, all of whom were laughing and cheering her on. "Ride 'em, Amber!" a woman shouted as she bumped past Madeline with 2 bottles of beer. "Show that steer who's boss!" Madeline wasn't sure if Amber was winning or losing, but her boobs sure looked great in the process, which was probably the point. More power to her, Madeline thought as she stopped in front of the bar. It didn't matter that the music was completely foreign, or that the crowd looked like extras in a country music video. When it came to attracting the opposite sex, it seemed the mechanics were the same. "What do you have, darling?" the bartender asked, his eyebrows raised expectantly. Though the bar was crowded, he leaned forward and grinned at her, as though he had all the time in the world. A half-dozen cocktails came to mind, but the likelihood of getting one here was probably slim to none, judging by the lack of bottles behind the bar. "I think it's probably safer to ask what you're serving," she said with a wry smile. He ticked off 5 different types of beer and 2 rot-gut whiskeys. She chose a bottle of the only beer she recognized. It was sufficiently cold and tasted exactly like college. Turning, she surveyed the room again, glad to have something to do with her hands. The place really wasn't so bad. It would be fun, actually, if her friends were here to share the experience. As it was, she leaned against the wall and hung out the "Do Not Disturb" sign across her forehead. She soaked in the noise, bustle, and activity, happy to have something remotely familiar in this strange place. She'd finish her drink, perhaps have another, and then maybe, she'd strike up a conversation. When in Rome. Madeline Harper, Calvin Aviation Supply's newest and youngest ever acquisitions division manager, was about to get her honky-tonk on. Tanner Callen saw her the moment she stepped foot in the joint. Well. The hot-as-hell Yankee had ventured out from the motel at last. He'd seen her zipping in and out of the parking lot in her fancy Beamer with the New York plates a few times this week, her face half covered by those dark, oversized sunglasses of hers. But even if he hadn't seen her plates, he would have known she was an out-of-towner at first glance. Her designer jeans and red-bottomed heels stood out in the sea of worn Levi's and scuffed boots, like a silk rose in a field of bluebonnets. Her top was low-cut, but loose, giving teasing hints of her trim figure as she shimmied her way to the bar and ordered a drink. Tanner shook his head. Evan looked like he was about to trip over his fool tongue as he served her a bottle of beer. "Better take your shot or I'm calling forfeit, Callen." Tanner dragged his attention away from the bar and laughed at his friend Mac. "You know that's the only way you'll ever win." He and Mac had been friends since the 8th grade, and ribbing each other was part of the game. Diego, who was a few years younger and still pretty wet behind the ears, chuckled and gave Mac a solid punch on the shoulder. "Burn! You gonna let him get away with that smack talk?" Shaking his head, Mac shrugged. "He can talk all he wants, but by the end of the night, dollars to donuts, he'll be the one taking the ride of shame on old Bucky." Tanner snorted as he set his beer down on the peanut shell-covered table and picked up his pool cue. "Big talk, considering it was your backside getting tossed off that old bull last time. And the time before that." It was a long-standing bet. Whoever lost 2 out of 3 games on the Yell's ancient coin-operated pool tables had a date with Bucky. What better way to give a rodeo star his comeuppance than to have him thrown like a sack of potatoes from a mechanical bull? Tanner glanced behind him one more time before turning his attention to the game. Miss New York still leaned against the bar, her honey blonde hair grazing those sexy bare shoulders of hers.